Tonight you find yourself in a quiet room, somewhere in Victorian England. A room softened by candlelight, where shadows rest gently along the polished wood of a dressing table, and heavy curtains fall in the still folds, keeping the outside world at a polite distance. On the table, there is a porcelain basin filled with water that has long since cooled. Beside it, a folded linen cloth, neatly arranged as though it had been placed there with quiet intention, and perhaps a small glass bottle, faintly clouded, holding the delicate trace of a floral perfume. The air itself seems to carry a memory, a whisper of lavender or rose water, something subtle, something fading, something that lingers more in suggestion than in presence. And everything here feels deliberate, measured, calm, as though every object in the room understands its place, and every motion within it has already been performed 1,000 times before, in much the same way, by hands equally careful, equally practiced. You may imagine the gentle sound of fabric shifting, the quiet placing of a brush against a wooden surface, the soft ripple of water as it is disturbed, briefly, before settling once more into stillness. There is no urgency here, only routine, only quiet attention. And perhaps as you settle more deeply into this space, allowing your thoughts to slow and soften, you begin to notice that this simple room, this modest arrangement of objects, is not merely functional. It is expressive. It speaks of a world where appearance, cleanliness, and scent carried meaning far beyond the surface. A world where the rituals of washing, grooming, and perfuming were not just practical acts, but quiet performances, small, repeated gestures that signaled something deeper about identity, respectability, and belonging. And this, too, was part of the quiet performance of respectability. In Victorian England, beauty was not loud, nor flamboyant, nor openly indulgent. It was restrained, controlled, often hidden beneath layers of etiquette and expectation. To be clean was not simply to be comfortable. To be well-groomed was not merely to be admired. These things, subtle as they may seem, were closely tied to one's sense of moral standing, to one's place within society, to the careful balance between what was seen and what was politely concealed. And so, even within this quiet room, even in the gentle stillness of candlelight and cooling water, while there exists a kind of quiet discipline, an unspoken understanding that how one presents oneself, how one washes, how one scents the skin, how one tends to the smallest details, matters in ways both visible and invisible. But the reality was often gentler, stranger, and more complicated. Because while the image of the Victorian world may suggest an era of strict cleanliness and delicate perfumes, the truth moves more slowly and with more texture. Bathing, for instance, was not yet the daily effortless ritual it would later become. Water, though present, was not always easily accessible in the way we might expect. Heating it required time, effort, and often the assistance of others. And so, full immersion bathing was less frequent than one might imagine, reserved for certain occasions, or particular households where resources allowed for such quiet luxuries. Instead, much of daily cleanliness unfolded in smaller, more contained gestures. A basin, a cloth, a careful wiping of the face, the hands, the neck. Areas considered visible, presentable, sufficient. And within these modest routines there was a kind of rhythm, a repetition that shaped the beginning and end of each day. You might imagine the early morning, before the house has fully awakened. The air still cool, the light only just beginning to find its way through the curtains. A figure stands at the washstand, sleeves slightly drawn back, the linen cloth dipped gently into the water, lifted, pressed softly against the skin. There is no rush. Each motion is deliberate, each movement familiar. And in that quiet, repetitive action, there is something almost meditative, something that invites stillness rather than urgency. And in that dim and perfumed world, even small routines carried meaning. Soap itself, though available, was not always as mild or as fragrant as we might expect today. Often made from animal fats and alkaline substances, it could be harsh on the skin, drying, even slightly abrasive. and so its use was balanced carefully, sometimes reserved for hands or specific needs, rather than for full, daily application. In place of constant washing, there was a reliance on linen. Undergarments made of soft, breathable fabric were worn close to the skin, absorbing oils and perspiration throughout the day. Changed regularly, they acted as a quiet intermediary between the body and the outer garments, preserving both cleanliness and modesty. And this, too, was part of the quiet performance of respectability. Because cleanliness, in the Victorian sense, was not always about the removal of every trace of dirt or scent. It was about management, about control, about presenting an image of order, even when the underlying reality was more complex. Hair, for example, was treated with a similar balance of care and restraint. Frequent washing was not always practical, and so other methods emerged. Brushing, for one, played an essential role. Long, repeated strokes of the brush through the hair, distributing natural oils, smoothing, aligning, maintaining a sense of neatness and health. Oils, too, were sometimes applied in small amounts. Pomades, scented lightly, used to tame, to shape, to give the hair a certain polished appearance. Then when the act of brushing itself became part of the daily rhythm, a quiet, repetitive motion, the soft sound of bristles moving through strands, the gentle pull, the release, the slow, consistent pace that mirrored the broader tempo of the day. But the reality was often gentler, stranger, and more complicated. Because beneath these rituals, beneath the careful grooming and the subtle sense, there existed a deeper tension, a desire to appear natural, untouched, effortlessly refined, while at the same time engaging in a series of quiet interventions that shaped that very appearance. Cosmetics, for instance, were approached with caution. Heavy makeup, bold colors, obvious alterations to the face. These were often associated with theatricality or even impropriety, and so the ideal was one of subtle enhancement, a complexion that appeared clear, even, and pale, but not artificially so. Powders might be used, applied lightly. Rice powder or similar fine substances dusted gently across the skin to reduce shine, to soften the appearance. A hint of color might be added, though discreetly. A touch of tint to the lips or cheeks, often derived from natural ingredients, applied in such a way that it seemed almost unnoticeable. And this, too, was part of the quiet performance of respectability. Because beauty in this context was not meant to be seen as constructed. It was meant to appear inherent, effortless, as though it required no effort at all. Perfume, perhaps, offers one of the most delicate insights into this world. Unlike modern fragrances, which often project boldly and persistently, the Victorian scents were typically softer, more intimate. They lingered close to the body, applied sparingly, a drop at the wrist perhaps, or lightly brushed onto a handkerchief. Common notes included lavender, rose, violet, orange blossom, scents drawn from gardens and fields, evoking a sense of nature, even within the confines of a structured indoor life. Glass bottles, often small and finely crafted, held these fragrances, their stoppers fitting precisely, preserving the contents with care. To open such a bottle was a quiet act, a gentle twist, a faint release, a momentary bloom of scent that would soon soften, settle, and fade. And in that dim and perfumed world, even small routines carried meaning. Because scent, like cleanliness, was not simply about the physical experience. It was about suggestion, about atmosphere, about the subtle ways in which a person might shape the space around them without drawing attention to the act itself. And yet, this carefully composed world of basins, brushes, linen, and perfume was not experienced equally by all. For those in wealthier households, these routines could unfold with a certain ease. Servants might prepare the water, lay out the garments, maintain the order of the room. The dressing table would be well stocked, the linens fresh, the perfumes varied, the mirrors polished to a gentle clarity. But for others, the experience was more modest, more constrained. Water might be shared, soap used sparingly, garments worn longer between changes. And yet, even within these limitations, the desire for cleanliness, for presentability, for quiet dignity remained. And this, too, was part of the quiet performance of respectability. Because respectability was not solely defined by wealth, it was shaped by effort, by intention, by the visible signs of care, however small. A clean collar, a brushed coat, a faint, simple scent. These details, subtle as they were, communicated something important, something deeply understood within the social fabric of the time. But the reality was often gentler, stranger, and more complicated. Because beneath the polished surfaces and the careful routines, there existed a constant negotiation between comfort and expectation, between practicality and appearance, between the body as it is and the body as it is meant to be seen. And so, as the day unfolded, these rituals would repeat themselves in quiet cycles. Morning, evening, small adjustments in between, a smoothing of hair, a reapplication of scent, a quick washing of hands before a meal. Each act, modest in isolation, contributing to a larger pattern, a rhythm that defined daily life in ways both visible and invisible. And now, as the evening returns, as the light begins to soften once more, you find yourself again in that quiet room. The basin, now emptied, the linen, folded, the perfume bottle resting quietly where it began. The air still holds a trace of something gentle, something fading, something that seems to belong as much to memory as to the present moment, and everything feels still, measured, calm, as though the day has gently folded itself away, leaving only the quiet residue of its routines behind. And perhaps, as you rest here a little longer, allowing your thoughts to drift more slowly now, you begin to sense that these small rituals, these quiet acts of care and presentation, were never only about the body itself. They were about something softer, something less easily defined, a way of moving through the world with intention, of shaping how one is seen, of finding within repetition and routine a kind of quiet order. And in that dim and perfumed world, even the smallest gestures carried meaning. The quiet room has not quite changed, and yet, as the night gently loosens its hold, something begins to shift. The darkness softens first, not all at once, but gradually, as though the edges of the room are remembering the shape of morning. Beyond the curtains, there is the faintest suggestion of light, a pale, but diffused glow that does not yet illuminate, but simply exists, waiting. Inside, the air remains still, touched only by the lingering traces of yesterday, a whisper of lavender perhaps, or the faint, clean scent of linen folded and set aside. And then slowly, almost imperceptibly, the day begins, not with sound, but with presence, a quiet awareness, the sense that the room, which only moments ago belonged to rest, now prepares itself for movement, for routine, for the gentle unfolding of another day. The basin is there, as it always is, resting quietly upon the stand, its porcelain surface cool to the touch, its emptiness suggesting what will soon follow. Nearby, a jug, heavy, waiting, holding water that has been drawn perhaps from a pump or a well, or carried carefully from another part of the house. And this, too, was part of the quiet performance of respectability. Because the day in Victorian England did not begin with haste. It began with preparation, with a series of small, familiar acts that bridged the stillness of night and the expectations of the waking world. You might imagine a hand reaching for the jug, lifting it with quiet care, tilting it slowly over the basin. The sound is soft, a gentle pouring, water meeting porcelain with a low, rounded echo, filling the empty space in a steady, unhurried stream. There is something calming in that sound, something steady, something that does not demand attention, but invites it gently. Steam may or may not rise depending on the household, the season, the effort made to warm the water. In some homes, the water is cool, brisk, awakening. In others, it carries a faint warmth, either the result of early rising, of time taken to prepare, of resources quietly arranged, but the reality was often gentler, stranger, and more complicated, because warm water, though desirable, was not always easily obtained. To heat it required fire and time, and someone to tend to both. And so for many, the morning wash unfolded with water that was simply present, cool perhaps, or only slightly warmed, enough to cleanse but not to comfort. And yet the ritual remained. The cloth is lifted next. Linen, soft from repeated use, folded neatly, then unfolded with care. It is dipped into the basin, the water absorbing into its fibers, darkening it slightly, weighing it down. And then gently, it is lifted again. A pause, a quiet moment where the cloth is held above the basin, where a few drops fall back into the water, creating small, circular ripples that expand, then disappear. There is no rush. The first touch is often the face, a gentle pressing of the cloth against the skin, cool, refreshing, deliberate. The sensation is immediate, but not harsh. A quiet awakening, a way of easing into the day rather than being pulled into it. The cloth moves slowly, across the forehead, the cheeks, the bridge of the nose, the chin. Each motion is familiar, repeated, unthinking, and yet deeply intentional. And in that dim and quiet morning, even this simple act carries a kind of quiet meaning. Because cleanliness, in the Victorian sense, was not simply about removing dirt. It was about readiness, about presenting oneself to the world in a state that suggested order, discipline, self-control. And this too was part of the quiet performance of respectability. The hands follow next. With palms turned upward, fingers spread slightly, the cloth passing between them, over them, around them. There is a certain care in this, a certain attention to detail. Hands were visible, expressive, constantly in view. To keep them clean was not only practical, but social, a signal, subtle but unmistakable, of one's attentiveness to appearance. The neck, too, is not forgotten. A place where skin meets fabric, where warmth gathers, where the signs of the body's quiet labor might otherwise remain. The cloth lingers here, pressing gently, moving slowly, leaving behind a faint coolness that fades as the skin adjusts. And in that dim and perfumed world, even small routines carried meaning. There is no full immersion, no deep bath. Not in this moment. The morning wash is partial, selective, focused on what is seen, what is presented. And this was not considered incomplete. It was sufficient, because the understanding of cleanliness was different, more nuanced, more closely tied to visibility than to totality. Clothing, especially linen, played its role quietly in this balance. The garments worn closest to the skin, shirts, shifts, were changed regularly, sometimes daily, sometimes less often, depending on circumstance. They absorbed what the body released, oils, warmth, the subtle traces of living, and by changing them, one refreshed not only the body, but the appearance of cleanliness itself. But the reality was often gentler, stranger, and more complicated, because for those with fewer resources, even this could be a careful negotiation. Water might be shared, basins used by more than one person, cloths rinsed and reused. Privacy, too, was not always guaranteed. The act of washing, though personal, could exist within shared spaces, within rooms that held more than one occupant, where routines overlapped quietly. And yet the intention remained, to begin the day with care, to create, within whatever means were available, a sense of order, of readiness. Hair in the morning required its own quiet attention. Not through washing, at least not daily, but through grooming. A brush is taken, its bristles firm, yet worn smooth from use. It passes through the hair in long, steady strokes, from root to end, again and again. There is a rhythm to it, a repetition that feels almost like breathing, slow, consistent, grounding. Each stroke redistributes the natural oils, smoothing, aligning, giving the hair a certain sheen, a certain calm. And this act, too, is unhurried. It may take several minutes, perhaps longer. There is no need to rush. The day has not yet fully begun. And so, there is time. Time for these small, quiet acts. Time for the body to wake slowly, for the mind to follow. Combs may be used as well, to part, to arrange, to create the structure that will be maintained throughout the day. Pins, simple, practical, are placed with care. Styles, though often modest, require attention. A smoothness, a neatness, an absence of disorder. And this, too, was part of the quiet performance of respectability, because hair, like hands, like face, was visible. It framed the individual, contributed to the impression given, the quiet message sent to others. And so, it was tended. Not extravagantly, but consistently. The mirror positioned upon the dressing table reflects these movements. Its surface may not be perfectly clear, perhaps slightly clouded with age, with use, with the subtle accumulation of time, and yet it serves its purpose, to show, to confirm, to allow for small adjustments, slight corrections, the smoothing of a stray strand, the repositioning of a collar. There is no lingering vanity here, no extended admiration, only observation. Only the quiet act of ensuring that what is seen aligns with what is expected. And in that dim and quiet morning, even this glance carries meaning. Because appearance in this context is not about indulgence. It is about alignment with social norms, with personal discipline, with the quiet expectations of the world beyond the room. Perfume in the morning is approached with restraint. A small bottle, lifted carefully, opened with a gentle twist. The scent, faint at first, rises slowly, not overwhelming, but present. A drop may be placed upon a cloth, or touched lightly to the skin, at the wrist, behind the ear, places where warmth will carry it softly throughout the day. There is no excess, no heavy application, only a suggestion, a whisper. And this too was part of the quiet performance of respectability. Because scent, like cleanliness, was meant to be noticed only in passing, in proximity, in moments of closeness. To be too strong, too obvious, would disrupt the balance, draw attention in ways that were not desired. And so, the morning routine continues, gently, steadily, without interruption. Garments are chosen, layers arranged, fabrics adjusted. Each piece has its place, its function, its quiet contribution to the whole. The weight of the clothing is felt, but not remarked upon. It is simply part of the day, part of the structure within which life unfolds. And as the final adjustments are made, as the basin water cools once more, as the cloth is set aside, damp but no longer needed, there is a moment, a pause, a quiet stillness before the transition, before the doors opened, before the world beyond the room is entered. And in that moment, everything feels composed, prepared, ready. And yet, beneath this calm surface, beneath the careful routines and the quiet discipline, there remains a deeper layer, one that is less visible, but equally present. Because cleanliness in Victorian England was not only about the body, it was about morality, about character, about the subtle, often unspoken connection between outward appearance and inner virtue. To be clean was to suggest self-control, order, respect for oneself and for others. To appear disordered, unkempt, carried implications that extended beyond the physical. And this too was part of the quiet performance of respectability. But the reality was often gentler, stranger, and more complicated, because life, as it always does, resisted perfect order. Dust would settle, fabrics would crease, the body would warm and change throughout the day. No routine, no matter how carefully performed, could fully prevent this. And so, the morning wash was not a final state, but a beginning, a foundation, upon which the rest of the day would quietly build. Small adjustments would follow, subtle corrections, a re-smoothing of hair, a quick washing of hands, a discreet refresh of scent. Each one a continuation, a quiet reaffirmation of the effort begun in the early hours. And in that dim and perfumed world, even small routines carried meaning. As the day moves forward, as the sounds of the household begin to rise, footsteps in distant corridors, the soft closing of doors, the faint clatter of objects being arranged, the quiet intimacy of the morning begins to dissolve. The private becomes public. The individual becomes part of a larger rhythm. And yet the traces of that morning routine remain, carried subtly in the way one moves, the way one is seen, the way one is perceived. And now as the hours pass, and the light grows stronger, and the world beyond the room fully awakens, we begin to move slowly, gently and toward another layer of this quiet, intricate world. The morning once begun does not hurry itself forward. It unfolds slowly, almost quietly enough to be missed. Light gathers along the edges of the curtains, soft and pale, brushing against the fabric as though asking permission to enter. And eventually it does, slipping through in thin, diffused lines that rest gently across the dressing table. The basin, the small glass bottle that still holds the faintest trace of scent. The room, which only moments ago belonged entirely to private ritual, begins to feel slightly more open, slightly more aware of the world beyond its walls. And yet the rhythm remains unbroken. The morning wash has been completed, but its presence lingers, not only in the coolness left upon the skin or the quiet neatness of hair and clothing, but in something less visible, something carried inward as much as outward, a sense of readiness, a quiet alignment. And this, too, was part of the quiet performance of respectability. Because cleanliness in this world is not a single act nor a fixed state. It is a condition that must be maintained, revisited, gently corrected as the day unfolds. Even now, as the light grows a little stronger, there is a soft awareness of what has already been done, and what must continue quietly in small and almost unnoticeable ways. The basin remains for a while longer, not immediately emptied, not immediately cleared away. Its surface reflects the growing light, disturbed only slightly by the faintest movement of air or the occasional shift within the room. The cloth, now set aside, still carries a trace of moisture, and perhaps, faintly, the scent of soap, or simply the clean, neutral presence of linen. Yet there is something comforting in these objects, in their stillness, in the way they hold the memory of recent action, and in that dim and quiet morning, even the absence of movement feels meaningful. Because the ritual does not end when the hands are dry. It continues in awareness, in posture, in the careful avoidance of disorder. You might imagine now the slow movement toward clothing, not the outer garments, which are more structured, more formal, but the layers beneath, the garments that sit closest to the skin. Linen again, soft, breathable, quietly essential. A fresh piece perhaps, drawn from a drawer, unfolded with care. The act of changing into clean linen was, in many ways, as significant as the washing itself. Because the fabric, worn close to the body, absorbed what the skin released: warmth, oils, the subtle, make constant presence of living. To replace it was to renew that boundary, to begin again. And this, too, was part of the quiet performance of respectability. The fabric feels cool at first, smooth against the skin, then gradually warms, adapting, becoming part of the body's quiet rhythm. There is no haste in this process, no urgency, only a steady progression, one layer at a time, each adjusted, smoothed, aligned. And as these layers are arranged, the body becomes composed, contained, prepared to be seen. But the reality was often gentler, stranger, and more complicated, because not every household could afford the luxury of frequent changes. For some, linen was limited, carefully maintained, washed and dried with effort, and so the meaning of cleanliness extended beyond the act itself, into the care of the objects that made it possible. The washing garments, drying them, folding them, preserving them. These too were part of the larger rhythm, the unseen continuation of the morning ritual. And in that dim and perfumed world, even small routines carried meaning. As the day continues to gather, attention shifts once more, this time to the hands. Though already washed, they are not forgotten. Hands, being constantly in use, require ongoing care. Small, repeated gestures throughout the day. A quick rinse, perhaps, or a simple wiping with a cloth, especially before meals or after tasks that leave a visible trace. There is a quiet awareness here, an understanding that cleanliness is not static. It moves. It changes. It must be gently restored, and this restoration is never dramatic, never excessive. Only small, almost invisible acts that maintain the impression first created in the early morning. The face, too, is occasionally revisited, though not in the same deliberate way. A light touch, a smoothing of the skin, the adjustment of a stray strand of hair. The mirror, still present, continues to offer its quiet reflection, not demanding attention, but available when needed. And in these brief moments of checking, of adjusting, there is no vanity, only maintenance, only the continuation of what has already begun. Because appearance, once established, must be sustained. And this too was part of the quiet performance of respectability. The understanding of cleanliness at this time rests not in perfection, but in consistency, in the ability to remain composed even as the day introduces its small disruptions. In dust, movement, warmth, all leave their subtle marks. But these marks are managed, softened, quietly corrected. Perfume, though applied sparingly in the morning, may also return in these moments. Not as a full reapplication, but as a gentle reinforcement. A cloth lightly touched, a handkerchief refreshed, a faint renewal of scent that remains close, intimate, almost private. And in that dim and perfumed world, even this smallest gesture carries meaning, because scent, like cleanliness, is part of the atmosphere one carries, a quiet extension of the self. The day continues in this manner, unfolding not in large, dramatic shifts, but in a series of small, overlapping routines. Each one subtle, each one contributing to the overall impression of order, of care, of quiet discipline. And yet, beneath this steady rhythm, there is always the presence of something more, a constant awareness of expectation. Because Victorian society placed great emphasis on outward presentation, on the visible signs of propriety. Cleanliness was not simply personal, it was social. To appear unclean or disordered was to risk being misunderstood, misjudged, placed outside the boundaries of respectability. And so these routines, though gentle, though seemingly simple, carried a quiet weight, a sense of responsibility, not only to oneself, but to the broader social world. And this too was part of the quiet performance of respectability. But the reality was often gentler, stranger, and more complicated. Because within the same society, experiences varied greatly. In larger homes, the morning routine might unfold with assistance, water prepared, garments laid out, objects arranged in advance. Time in such spaces could feel more abundant, the rituals more extended, the details more finely attended. But in smaller homes, in shared spaces, the experience shifted. The basin might serve multiple people. The water used more than once. The time available more limited. Privacy, too, might be reduced. The act of washing taking place within a room that held other lives, other routines. And yet, even here, the intention remained. To begin the day with care. To create, within whatever circumstances existed, a sense of order, of readiness, of quiet dignity. And in that dim and quiet morning, even this effort carried meaning. Because respectability was not solely defined by ease, it was defined by intention. By the visible signs of effort, however modest, however constrained, a clean collar, a smooth sleeve, a face gently washed. These were enough. These were understood. As the morning continues to unfold, the sounds of the household begin to grow slightly more present. A distant footstep, soft, measured, passing along a corridor. The faint movement of a door, opening then closing, perhaps the quiet clink of porcelain or the subtle shifting of objects being arranged elsewhere. These sounds do not disturb the calm. They simply add to it, layering the stillness with gentle indications of life. And within this growing awareness of the wider world, the individual remains composed, prepared, quietly aligned with the expectations of the day. The morning wash, though simple, has done its work, not only in cleansing the body, but in shaping the posture, the presence, the subtle confidence with which one moves forward. And this too was part of the quiet performance of respectability. Because to be clean, in this sense, was to be ready to be seen, to be encountered, to be part of the social rhythm that awaited beyond the private space of the room. But even as the day begins to extend outward, the memory of the morning remains. The cool touch of water, the softness of linen, the faint, lingering trace of scent. These sensations do not disappear. They settle, gently, becoming part of the background, part of the quiet awareness carried throughout the day. And in that dim and perfumed world, even these fading impressions carried meaning, because they served as a kind of anchor, a reminder of the order that had been established, the calm that had been created. And so the day moves forward, not as a break from the morning, but as a continuation of it. Each action, each interaction, subtly influenced by the quiet discipline of those early hours. And as we remain within this slow, unfolding rhythm, as the morning becomes fully realized and the world beyond the room continues to stir, we begin to notice something else, something quieter still. The objects themselves, the brush resting where it was last placed, the cloth now drying slowly, the small bottle of perfume, closed once more, its contents undisturbed. These items, though simple, are not passive. They are part of the ritual, part of the rhythm, each one holding a role, a purpose, a quiet presence within the larger pattern of daily life. The morning has now settled into itself. What began as a quiet transition from darkness into light has become something steadier, more grounded, less fragile. The room is no longer suspended between night and day. It belongs fully now to the day. And yet the calm remains, not the stillness of night, but a different kind of quiet, one shaped by gentle activity, by the soft continuation of routines that do not disturb the air, but simply move through it. The dressing table, which held such quiet importance only a short while ago, now rests in a more passive state. The basin has been emptied, perhaps, or left with only a thin layer of water at the bottom, its surface no longer reflecting the early light with the same clarity. The cloth has been lifted away, set aside to dry, its purpose, for now, complete. And yet, even in this resting state, these objects feel present. They do not disappear from the rhythm of the day. They wait, they remain. They will be returned to again, later, in quieter moments. And this too was part of the quiet performance of respectability, because the morning wash, though central, was never the entirety of cleanliness. It was an opening gesture, a beginning. The rest of the day would move around it, adding to it, gently adjusting what had already been set in place. You might imagine now the slow movement into the spaces beyond the private room. A corridor, perhaps, softly lit, the floorboards carrying the faintest echo of footsteps. A door opening, not abruptly, but with care. The quiet shift from solitude into shared space. And with that shift, the meaning of cleanliness begins to change slightly. It becomes visible, not in any obvious or dramatic way, but in small, subtle details. The way fabric sits smoothly, without crease or disorder. The way hands move, clean, composed, unmarked by the tasks of the early morning. The faint suggestion of scent, noticeable only in passing, never lingering too long. And in that dim and perfumed world, even these small impressions carried meaning. Because to be clean was not only to feel clean, it was to be perceived as such, to exist within a shared understanding of what cleanliness looked like, what it suggested, what it quietly communicated. There is something almost unspoken in this, a silent agreement, a collective awareness. No one announces their cleanliness. No one draws attention to it, and yet it is seen. Like it is understood, and this too was part of the quiet performance of respectability. As the day unfolds further, the body begins to move more fully, to engage with its surroundings, to take part in the quiet tasks and interactions that shape daily life. And with movement comes change. The warmth of the body shifts, the skin adjusts. The careful stillness of the morning gives way to a more dynamic rhythm. But this change is not resisted, it is expected. And so, the routines of cleanliness adapt, not in large deliberate acts, but in small, almost invisible gestures. A hand brushed lightly against fabric to remove a trace of dust, a sleeve adjusted, smoothed, aligned. A momentary pause near a washstand, a quick rinse of the fingers, the cool touch of water returning briefly to the skin. These are not formal rituals. They are not planned. They simply occur naturally as part of the flow of the day. And yet they are essential because they maintain the impression, the quiet sense of order that began in the morning. And this too was part of the quiet performance of respectability. You may begin to notice now the way objects are arranged in these shared spaces. A small basin placed discreetly near a corner, a cloth folded nearby, a jug of water, not full but sufficient. These are not elaborate setups. They are simple, practical, unobtrusive, and yet their presence allows for these small acts of maintenance to take place without disruption, without drawing attention, without interrupting the rhythm of the day. And in that dim and quiet morning, even these quiet provisions carried meaning, because they supported the continuation of cleanliness, the gentle reinforcement of what had already been established. The hands, once again, take on quiet importance. They move through the day, touching surfaces, handling objects, participating in tasks both large and small. And so, they are returned to water, briefly, lightly, often without ceremony. A dip, a rinse, a soft drying with cloth. Nothing excessive, nothing that would draw notice. Only what is necessary, only what maintains. And this too was part of the quiet performance of respectability. The face, though less frequently revisited, is not entirely forgotten. A moment before a mirror, a soft touch to the cheek, a smoothing of the skin, not to change, not to alter, but simply to ensure that what was prepared in the morning remains undisturbed. Hair, too, Hunter receives these quiet adjustments. A strand tucked back into place, a brush passed lightly through the surface. Not a full grooming, but a gentle correction. The overall shape remains. The order is preserved. And in that dim and perfumed world, even these smallest gestures carried meaning, because they demonstrated awareness, attention, a quiet commitment to maintaining the standards that had been set. But the reality was often gentler, stranger, and more complicated, because the day, as it unfolds, introduces elements that cannot be fully controlled. Weather, for instance, the presence of wind, of dampness, of warmth. These leave their subtle marks. Fabric may shift, hair may loosen, the skin may respond. And so the routines adapt again, gently, without resistance. A cloth may be used to dab away moisture, a garment adjusted slightly, a moment taken to restore rather than to perfect. Because perfection in this context is not the goal. Continuity is. And this too was part of the quiet performance of respectability. The understanding that cleanliness is not absolute, but relative, not fixed, but ongoing. And so the day becomes a quiet dialogue between the body and its environment, between effort and adaptation, between intention and reality. As the hours pass, there are moments of pause, moments where activity slows, where the rhythm softens again, perhaps in a sitting room or near a window, where light falls more steadily. And in these moments, the awareness of the body returns, more gently, more inwardly. A hand rests against fabric, noticing its texture. A breath is taken, and with it, the faint scent of perfume rises again, softened now, blended with the natural warmth of the skin. These sensations are subtle, They do not demand attention, and yet they are felt. They are present. And in that dim and perfumed world, even these quiet sensations carried meaning, because they connected the outer presentation to the inner experience. They reminded the individual of the care that had been taken, the order that had been established. And so the day continues, not in a straight line, but in gentle cycles. Moments of activity, followed by moments of stillness. Moments of interaction, followed by quiet return. And throughout it all, the thread of cleanliness remains, subtle, consistent, quietly maintained. And this too was part of the quiet performance of respectability. Because respectability was not a single act. It was a continuous presence, a way of moving through the world, a quiet discipline that shaped both behavior and perception. But the reality was often gentler, stranger, and more complicated. Because beneath this discipline, there existed the simple human experience of being within the body, of warmth, of movement, of change. And these could not be entirely shaped by routine. They existed alongside it, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in quiet contrast. And so there is a softness in the way these routines are carried out, a flexibility, a willingness to adjust, to respond, not rigid, not forced, but gently persistent. And as the day begins to move toward its later hours, as the light shifts once more, becoming softer, more angled, there is a subtle return, a quiet drawing back toward the private space, toward the room, toward the basin, the cloth, the small glass bottle. The objects that began the day now wait again, unchanged, patient, ready. And in that dim and quiet space, the rhythm begins to slow once more. The movements become smaller, more deliberate. The awareness turns inward again. The body, having moved through the day, begins to settle, to release, to return. And this return, too, carries its own form of cleanliness. Not the same as the morning, not as structured, but equally meaningful. A washing of the hands, perhaps, a gentle cleansing of the face. The removal of the small traces gathered throughout the day. Dust, warmth, the quiet residue of movement. The water once again meets the skin, cool, familiar, calming. And in that moment, the cycle feels complete. The day, with all its quiet activity, has returned to stillness. And this, too, was part of the quiet performance of respectability. Because cleanliness was not only about beginning the day, it was about closing it, gently, with the same care, the same attention, the same quiet discipline. And in that dim and perfumed world, even this return carried meaning. As the room settles once more into the softer light of evening, as the curtains are drawn, as the outside world recedes, the basin rests again, the cloth is folded, the perfume bottle remains closed, everything is in its place, everything is calm. And as we linger here in this quiet space at the gentle end of the day, we begin to notice something else, something that has been present all along, but not yet fully explored. The objects themselves, not only as tools, but as companions to these rituals. The textures, the materials, the weight of them in the hand, of the brush, the powder, the glass bottle, each one carrying its own quiet presence, its own role within the rhythm of beauty and cleanliness. The room once again returns to stillness, though it is not the same stillness as before. It carries with it the memory of the day, not in any visible way. Nothing has changed so much that it would draw the eye. And yet something lingers, something soft and almost imperceptible. The faint warmth left in the air, the quiet presence of objects that have been touched, used, and gently set back into place. The dressing table waits as it always does. Polished wood reflecting the low glow of candlelight, its surface holding the familiar arrangement of items that seem, now, less like objects and more like companions to the slow rhythm of daily life. A brush rests where it was last placed, its bristles slightly separated from use, but still neat, still composed. A small container of powder sits nearby, closed, its fine contents undisturbed. though the faintest trace may linger on the surface, barely visible in the dim light. And the glass bottle, delicate, almost weightless in appearance, holds within it a scent that has been used, but not exhausted. Something floral, perhaps. Something soft and quietly persistent. And in that dim and perfumed world, even these simple objects carried meaning, because they were not merely tools. They were extensions of the ritual. They shaped the experience, guided the movement, gave form to the quiet acts that defined beauty and cleanliness in Victorian England. You might imagine now the slow return to the dressing table. Not with urgency, not with intention to begin something new, but simply as part of the natural closing of the day. A hand reaches out, not hurried, not searching, but familiar with the placement of each item. The brush is lifted. Its handle fits comfortably into the palm, worn smooth from repeated use, shaped over time by the quiet pressure of fingers. There is a weight to it, gentle but present, a sense that it belongs in the hand. And when it moves through the hair once more, the sound is soft, almost rhythmic, the bristles passing through strands with a steady, whispering motion. If this quiet journey brought you even a moment of calm, you're always welcome to return. And if you'd like more gentle stories like this, you can simply stay and let the next one find you.